What if you could take that risk, make that change, reach that goal, live your best life? Welcome to another episode of the What If You Could podcast, where we get together with amazing experts and everyday people who share challenges, encourage healing, and explore the possibilities that life has to offer. I'm your host, Gary Scott, and I'm excited that you're along for the ride.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of What If You Could. And today's guest is the effervescent Bob Martin. And you're going to love Bob. I mean, we're all over the planet here with Bob, all sorts of great things. But I think at the end, you're going to find some really helpful practices for you and some information. So, hello, Bob Martin.
Good morning. What am I saying? Good evening, at least where I am. Where are you?
I don't even know. It's still daylight, so if it's daylight, it's probably like 1 in the afternoon, I guess, because it
Okay.
gets dark at like 3:30.
So I'm in North Carolina and it's dusk.
Oh, what part of North Carolina?
It's a town called Elon. It's in between Greensboro and Durham and Raleigh. It's up in the middle of the state. It's mostly known for Elon University. It's a
And
college town
and basketball.
and basketball.
My
North
friends,
Carolina is, yeah.
really good friends of mine just moved to Asheville, and they love
Uh-huh.
it.
Oh, poor Asheville.
Yeah, I know.
Got hit by the hurricane.
I know. It's our poor North Carolina has been neglected, that's for sure. But Bob, what I'm going to do is
Mhm.
I'm going to go ahead and read your bio.
Okay.
This is a very short bio compared to all that you've done, but I just at least give people a flavor of you, and then we're just going to set you loose if that's okay.
That's fine.
All right, here I go. Um, Bob Martin's uncommon journey takes him from a high-powered criminal trial lawyer during Miami's cocaine cowboy era to a healing mindfulness coordinator, certified meditation mentor, and published author. At 74, Bob draws from his diverse experiences as a criminal lawyer, restaurant owner, corporate consultant, and community leader to guide others towards clarity and peace. Currently serving as a professor of wellness and mindfulness coordinator at Elon University, Bob blends Taoist teachings, brain science, and psychology to help individuals break free from limiting beliefs. His story of transformation offers powerful insights into resilience, fulfillment, and living a meaningful life. Well, that's all good stuff.
Yeah. Every time I hear that, I keep thinking, who is that guy?
Who did all that stuff?
Who
Who
did all
is
that
that
stuff?
guy? Well, Bob, again, I'm just so grateful you're here. I loved your bio, your story. I looked through both of your books. I didn't have time to order them. I do try to read someone's book before they come on as a guest. I just didn't grab the time. Um, but I'm grateful for here. So because we are the What If You Could podcast, I wondered if you'd give us a quick what if you could moment or what if you could thought from Bob Martin.
What if you could redesign your thinking to create the person you dream of being?
Wow. Is that possible?
It is.
How do we get there?
Well, my route, and I think probably the easiest route, although many people think meditation is beyond them, which it's not, but I think the easiest route is to watch your thinking. You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
get up and just spend time, with your mind.
When I just read a snippet of your bio, but when you talk about meditation and mindfulness and things like that, from whence you've come, whatever the term is, I mean, no one likes attorneys, trial
Including my
attorneys.
dad,
Now,
including my dad.
yeah. Now that we know the cocaine cowboys liked attorneys, but you've had some struggles from then to finding, it's easy to say, well, let's just drop and do some meditation and we're all going to be happy, but you've had a long road to get here to have a statement like that.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
What along the way, how did you find it? How did you go from being an attorney, which is difficult on the soul and the psyche, to all the other things that you've done to finding this sort of wellness and spiritualness?
Yeah, it's a great question. Thank you for it. So I would say that how I the why of how I got here is pretty common. There's really nothing unusual about. Now, the how of how I got here is unique. I mean, my story, like everyone's story, is unique, but I've had some pretty wild experiences. And in that regard, it's different. But in terms of the why, it's the common story of thinking that you know everything, being successful on many levels, feeling that you're an imposter, going out and partying too much, or being arrogant. And I was doing some drugs and the like, and my private life was unraveling. So I was seeing a therapist. And it's not unusual that when people's lives, start to scrape bottom, that you A, want to reach out for help, and B, you're in a mindset to accept it. Those are a lot of times people will reach out for help, but they're not really ready to accept it. But when you're scraping bottom, you generally are. So in that regard, my story is pretty common.
You
Uh,
but you went to in your, to your credit, um because you go from hanging out to Tony Montano and the gang, which who's my idol, by the way. That's probably not
Right,
good to
right,
say.
right.
Maybe he's not a great guy, but he's
And I,
my
and I
idol.
want to tell you that of course, the facts in Scarface and in Miami Vice, were all fictional, but the vibe that they showed, I'll tell you from experience, that was the vibe of Miami in those days. It really, really was. I mean, there are stories to tell.
Oh, I bet. I bet. I mean, what a crazy, crazy time. But when you, a lot of people didn't wake up. I mean, you could bounce off the bottom forever. But when you did realize that, you went to therapy. And back in the 80s, for a man to put himself into therapy to start working on himself was pretty rare.
And I wouldn't say just in those days. One of my biggest, I'm not going to say it's quite a heartbreak, but one of my biggest sadnesses is that in my, coaching, in my teaching of meditation, in our talk of happiness and healing and living a effective and efficient life, men are terribly underrepresented. I mean, I'll have a class of 15 and there might be one or two guys there. And so even today, there's still that stigma of, the Marlboro man, the
Yeah.
dun 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 dun, riding on his horse, being the self-made individualist who pulled himself up by his bootstraps and never cries.
Yeah.
Not not
Before I
happening.
started doing this,
Yeah.
I lost my first wife to cancer, and one of my best friends lost his wife to cancer. And so we started a podcast called Grief Pie,
Mm-hmm.
two guys eating grief one bite at a time. And we
Mm-hmm.
went deep. We were crying, we were weeping on the thing. We only
Mm-hmm.
made it about 30 episodes before he crashed and burned. He's like, dude, I can't do this anymore. But it was 92% women who
Mm-hmm.
would listen.
Mm-hmm.
And we tried to reach out to men to say, come on and be a guest and share your story. This is about men sharing grief. No, I think I had one dude reach out. The interesting thing is, behind the scenes, people would text me and email me, go, hey man, I saw that episode. I don't want to come on, but I just wanted to say this or that. I'm like, why don't you come on?
Yeah.
But men just can't do it.
It's hard. It's hard. It's hard. It's all that culturalization and conditioning. Yeah, when I say the Marlboro Man, I'm not kidding. I mean, that Marlboro Man was the icon of masculinity for years and years and years. And even today, when you look at the political scene, and you ask yourself, why do people follow strongman leaders, for example? And it's the Marlboro Man. You want that image of the guy up there on the cowboy who can go out and fix everything and rope 12 cattle and bring them all back home. You know,
Well, we all wanted the coat. Let's face it, that coat the dude wore was badass. I mean, we
yeah,
all
right. You
wanted
got
that
that
coat.
right.
I smoked, I smoked cigarettes. I smoked Marlboros
Mhm.
for about 15 minutes when I got out of high school because I dated a girl I really liked who smoked. And I said, well, if she smokes, I'll smoke. Within a couple days, I'm like, she's gone because I hate these these cigarettes. So I don't want you or your cigarettes or my cigarettes. So I didn't have a very long smoking career,
Right, right.
but it's true, it's tough to reach men.
Hmm.
Um, but it's also tough to get people to meditate, I'd imagine, because my mind is a constant drunk monkey squirrel, and he's just running around pooping in his hand and throwing poop everywhere, and just I've tried, but maybe I'm just not doing it right.
Well, let
How do
me
you
ask
get
you,
people into
what,
that meditative?
let me ask you this. What is it that you tried to do?
Well, we set up a Zen garden on the side patio of the house. So it was real private. We had the plants, we had a special little area, and I got a little waterfall, and we had the chimes, it was a beautiful setup, right? So I'd go there and I would sit peacefully and I would try to empty my mind. And then I had a friend say, well, just focus on white. Pretend you're in a white room and just be in a white room with no sound and no color and focus on that. I'm like, all right, well, that lasted about 37 seconds. So
Yeah, right.
I
You're right.
just, no, nothing
And
was
if
working.
this was a game show, you would hear, "Eh."
That's what I heard in my head.
Right, right, right. So, yeah, that what you just said is what everybody says. Not everybody, but anybody who, feels that they can't meditate, that's the reason is so often the same. My mind just goes crazy, it goes wild. And on my website, for example, there's one video that I have that was there by Ron Doolin, and this fella had a panic attack while he was a newscaster and had a panic attack live on camera. And it was a terrible thing for him. And then he said, I got to do something about this. And now he's one of the leading teachers of meditation and advocates for it. But there's a little video that he made called Meditation 101. And it's this little creature, like kind of a dog cartoon. And he says, so here's what you do. You sit down and you feel your breath, and then you create an intention to put your attention on your breath, and then your mind's going to go nuts. And the screen fills up with, you're going to think about, did you leave the stove on, and you should have said this to that guy, and what do you have to do tomorrow, and what are you going to have for dinner, and you shouldn't have said that to so and so, and when are you going to get the job, and how's that interview going to go, and your mind will go nuts. And it's perfectly okay because the brain is designed that way. It is a question of evolutionary psychology. You see, when we evolved in the forest and we were hunter gatherers, there was always the possibility of a snake or a danger or something crawling in the woods. And so our mind was always designed to scan our environment. But now our environment doesn't present dangers. It's things like deadlines and missing a bus or being late for an appointment or not having put something on our calendar. And so there's really no jungle or nothing to focus on what's attacking us. But our brain is still scanning anyway. And that's what causes your mind to go nuts because you're looking for that thing which is going to hurt you. Did I leave the stove on? I should have said this. And it's just scanning, 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 a perfectly natural, normal event of the brain. So let me take it to a different place. Um, so Gary, I'm sure that you have had this experience. you're listening to somebody and you really are listening to, they got a great story. And then all of a sudden you realize that for the past 60 seconds, you haven't been listening to them. Your mind has wandered off somewhere, right? Now, tell me if this isn't true. When you notice that you are not listening, there's kind of a very subtle little feeling of startle. It's like, oh, right? Like just that little startle. Well, and then what do? Then, first of all, you beat yourself up and you try to figure out how you're going to get him to repeat it without him saying it over again and not wanting to let him know. And you go through all this judgment and all this stuff in your head. Meanwhile, you're missing more of what he's saying, right? But eventually, you do go back and start listening again, right? You have just meditated. That is what meditation is, except we set it up artificially so that you can practice doing that same thing over and over. What we say is put your attention on a candle or put your attention on your breath, and then within seconds, your mind's going to go nuts and you're going to wander off somewhere. And then because you told your mind that you want to put your attention on your breath, it sets like a little alarm clock inside of your mind. And eventually, in a little bit, it'll wake you up and remind you that your intention was to pay attention to the candle. And you'll get that same little startle. Oh, I'm not paying attention to the candle. And then you'll beat yourself up and say, oh, I wasn't able to keep focus. I wasn't able. But now you're experiencing the critical committee in your head, but you're experiencing it because you're doing it with intentionality. You're seeing the judgments come up. You're seeing your thoughts come up. And then you come back and you begin again. And then your mind goes off and you notice it. And you come back and you begin again. And your mind goes off and you notice it. This process of just repeating this very simple little exercise teaches you, A, what it feels like to wake up. That's when you wake up. So now I've distinguished between being in default mode and waking up. I'm driving along, I'm in default mode. Another car gets a little bit too close to me. Wham, my attention, I'm awake, right?
Mm-hmm.
Two different states of mind. One is awake and the other's asleep. And so you start to learn the difference between being awake and being asleep. In a very short period of time, you start to develop the skill of watching the thoughts move through your mind. Takes a couple of weeks of this simple little practice, 10 minutes a day, couple of weeks, and then all of a sudden you come to this amazing realization. I want to say the F word, but I'll restrain
We
myself.
drop ton of F-bombs. Just don't worry
Okay.
about yourself. Let it rip,
You
baby.
you say, what the F? My whole life has been controlled by these little electrical impulses that are passing through my brain, and that's been running my life. How crazy is that? Now, it'll take a little time to reprogram your database, and so that you start getting the thoughts that you would prefer to have rather than the self-critical thoughts and the like. But once you get to that realization, once you can see your thoughts and you can see that you're not your thoughts, you're free. Now you can do whatever you want. You can go back into default mode and forget about it and live the life that the world gave you, or you can continue along the path little by little, becoming more and more familiar with your thinking process and eventually clean out your attic and redesign your thinking.
Is this a muscle that
Yes.
you have to? So I'm going to do a minute today. I'm going to do 3 minutes next week. I'm going to do. Is that what we have to do? It's just we have to accept that it's just a muscle. We're not going to get an hour of enlightenment the very first time out.
No, no, of course not. Of course not. That's like one of my students once asked me. I was saying that there's a term that comes from Buddhism called dukkha, Dukkha. Dukkha means unpleasantness. Okay. And it can be anything from your friend being late to to your dinner to losing a child, or in your case, losing your spouse.
Mhm.
All of that is dukkha. And what we say is it's not the fact that you're never going to be able to avoid dukkha, but it's how you deal with it and how you choose to deal with it that makes all the difference in the world. So this one lady said when I was talking, she said, "Oh, so if I were to lose my loved one, I should start meditating." And I go, "Well, it's kind of like if your friend said, 'Would you help me move into my second floor apartment and I've got a lot of heavy furniture,' and you decide that you're going to start going to the gym that morning." Doesn't work. Yeah, it's like a muscle. You prepare. Now, as far as extending the time, this is what I tell my students. I tell them, we'll start with 10 minutes and your mind should wander. Now, if you get to the point where the side effect of doing the practice will be actually you can't make yourself be able to concentrate more or make yourself be able to focus more. But if you do the practice, a side effect will be that you can focus more and that the time between your thoughts gets longer and longer. So I say, if you start getting to the point where you can do 10 minutes and your mind does not wander, then move to 15 because you want your mind to wander. You want to get long enough that your mind wanders because it's the waking up and the returning where the healing happens.
That's like tearing the muscle.
That's when you're working at your limit. You're working at your edge. You
Because
want to work at your edge always. Hmm.
I was thinking, unfortunately, I'm sure I'm not alone in this happening, but it's like driving home. If you drive the same way home every day and drive the same way to work, you know, you're zoned out. I mean,
Hmm.
I'll get home and say, I don't remember the last, and this is sober, by the way. I don't
Hmm.
even remember the last 5 minutes of driving home.
Hmm. Hmm.
So was that where just the humming of the car, the repetitiveness of the road, where my mind can just wander? And I'm obviously control of the car, right? But I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah.
is that the wander you're talking about?
Yeah, that's well, I think default. It's the default mode. That's when we're caught up in a fog of rumination and projection. We're thinking about stuff that happened and we're projecting into the future, and our mind's just in default mode. And that is not something you should avoid. I mean, that's good. I mean, it's restful. I mean, it's nice when you've been working all day to get in your car and not having to think, and you just kind of like, go home and then you're home and it's pretty effortless. There's nothing wrong with that. That's great. But it's not meditating. It's like, it's like sitting at a desk and doing, well, I mean, walking down the hall to get water at the water fountain is walking, but it's not exercise walking.
Yeah.
So
You, I
yeah,
think it was you, um, because I've read so much of your stuff. I mean, you've got so much to go through besides the two books that we'll get to, but was it you who went to your therapist and said, "Hey, I've got this opportunity. I need to borrow some money to blow up my business," and he pulled out these
yeah, that's
stones and
me.
rolled
That's
them, and
me.
then
It's that's
so
me.
was that your introduction to this sort of spirituality or
Yes.
that something above just normal therapy?
Yep, yep, yep. Surprised crap out of me. Um, so my folks, my dad was Hungarian royalty and was born in 1898. And the Bolsheviks invaded Hungary after the Russian Revolution in the early part of the 20th century. They killed off all his relatives. He escaped and immigrated to America. My mom was Roma Gypsy, and everybody killed off all her relatives.
When I
And so,
read that, I laughed. I didn't mean to because it's not funny, but the way you stated it was very funny.
yeah, it was what is. And so God was not something that they had a lot of faith in. And so in my family, they weren't against God. They weren't atheists or agnostics that question. It just wasn't a conversation that we had. We just went about our business and we didn't have that conversation. Fortunately, my dad was a very righteous, meticulous man who was a wonderful role model for me, but not in any kind of spiritual way. So, fast forward to my teenage years, and I'm reading a lot of science fiction. And if you know anything about science fiction, they've always got God concepts, in there. And so I'm thinking now, and so now I'm thinking about, the universe and how it was formed and all that kind of stuff. Then fast forward, now I'm in my 30s. It's the 19 late 70s, early 80s, and my life is it's unraveling. And I'm seeing a therapist, and like I say, I was a mob lawyer at the time, and so I was going out with these guys to the chrome and glass discotheques of the 70s, and like I say, it was the cocaine cowboy days, and there was a lot of cocaine around, and when you do cocaine, you feel like you're at the top of the world and arrogant, and you can make anything happen, and you can make $1 million. And I was investing in a bunch of stuff, and it came to a point. I had already paid. Look at this. In my mid 30s, I had paid off my house. That's how well I was doing, and these businesses were diving, and to keep them afloat, I'd have to mortgage my house. And I went and I asked him, should I do that? That was the question. And he reached and pulled out a little bag with three Chinese coins in it. And he shook his hands and he dropped them on and he started counting out some figures, doing some math and writing down lines on a piece of paper. And then he looked 6 lines, he looked at it, he wrote a number above it, 32, and turned around, got this big book, opened it to chapter 32 and showed it to me. And the title of the chapter was Retreat. So I'm paying the guy in those days, $65 an hour was a lot of money. And he's throwing coins, right? So I curse him out and I stomp out. I was not what I wanted to hear. I wanted to continue pushing forward and making it happen, and but I drove around for a little while and I realized that's what I got to do. So I walked into the business. I said, "We're done. I'm out of money. Close up shop. Sorry. Goodbye." And I started pulling back from some of my other excesses, and it saved me from going down the rabbit hole. And I realized that within a week or two, I realized that this is what I had to do. So I go back to see George, and now I'm a little bit humble, you know. What was that? And he says, "Oh, Bob, that was the I Ching." What is the I Ching? He says, "It's a Taoist practice." What's Taoism? Turns out that my therapist was the English language editor and disciple of this 72nd generation. I just want to stop and let that sink in.
Right. 77 generations is
Generation
not
master.
77 years. It's
No, the
77 generations.
72nd. I figured it out, and it's about 1,400 years that his wisdom had been passed down from father to son. And he was out of the Shaolin Temple, which, if you remember the old movie Kung Fu, that's the grasshopper,
Yeah.
that's the Shaolin Temple, Kung Fu, Tai Chi, all that stuff. And I was Taoism does not ask you to believe in a God. It's simply an operating system for what works. And it's much more physics. It does believe that there is a flow of energy. Even yin and yang, which are called the negative and the positive energies, are not negative and positive in terms of the judgments that we have. They're negative and positive in terms of the poles of a battery. So you have to have the two poles for energy to flow. And it is the flow of energy, the interplay of things that creates other things. And there's no great overall intelligence. There's just the workings of the Tao.
It's
And
incredible how common sense it is.
oh yeah.
Some of the paragraphs and is that how you ended up going to train under, I'm going to completely trash, Hua Ching Ni?
Hua, Hua
You're going to
Ching
have to
Ni.
say the whole name because I
Yeah,
completely trashed it. I'm sorry.
Hua Ching Ni.
Ah,
Yeah, he was the master that George edited for. He wrote it in Chinese. It got translated in English, and George edited the English. And he was a disciple. And Master Nee came to Miami once a month, and we had a group that met every week, and we engaged in the practices. And I suppose what Master Nee taught me the most, and where he concentrated his training of me, was in the use of the I Ching, which is a practice, a daily practice where you build. It's a practice. I know it sounds a little weird, but it's a practice of actually building up your intuitive intelligence and then figuring out a way for the two sides of your brain to communicate between the intuitive side and the verbal side. Um,
so
the I
it's not prayer or meditation.
No,
It's neither one. Okay.
neither one.
It's
No.
just it's when you say intuition, I know a lot of people have a sixth sense or they're just intuitive about people. It's like I always say, if a dog doesn't like you, there's something wrong with you. Dogs are very intuitive, right?
Right, right,
So
right.
is that what you mean by that, or is it a different level if it's something higher?
I do, that when you meet somebody, you say, I just didn't have a good feeling about that person, or I got a hunch. I really think that, I'm feeling like we ought to do this. That's your intuitive side speaking. And it's not like it can't be wrong. I mean, or it can't give you ideas that don't wind up to be helpful, but it is pretty smart. Um,
Why do you train it then? What are you looking for by training your intuition? What's the purpose of it in relation to the Taoism and your training?
Great, great, great question. So, I guess the belief is that most of the things that we question or wonder about, at some level, we already know the answer. If you're having an interview later today and you're asking, what do I need to know about this interview? If you could allow that kind of nonverbal intelligence, that answer is real. You already really know that answer. You're just not being able to verbalize it. So if I can strengthen that intuitive thing so that I can begin to verbalize my hunches and I build a bridge between those two intelligences, I'm making a little bit more use of my brain and the different intelligence. When people say rely on your gut, have faith in those are the kinds of things that you want to build up so that they become more accurate, and you can. And the way that you do that is that's like this other conversation that we could have calling it's called going with the flow.
Mhm.
Now in Taoism, there is a term that we have called WUWEI, Wu Wei. And Wu Wei literally means doing, not doing. And if you were to read the Taoist things, you'll see this a lot, that you do nothing and yet nothing remains undone. Now, that sounds kind of mystical and tinkly, but it's not. The best example of Wu Wei is when you have a basketball player who's just hitting every three-pointer, and he's always right there where the pass comes, and he's just playing the perfect game. And he comes off and you said, wow, you had a really good game. And he'll say something like, yeah, it didn't even feel like me out there.
I was in the zone.
I was in the zone. Exactly. So Wu Wei is living in the zone. And what Master Ni taught me is that it's not only athletics, that you can live your entire life in the zone. We asked him once, what's it like to be Master Ni? And he said, no rehearsing thoughts. No rehearsing thoughts.
Mm.
The guy just is there, And when something happens, he responds to it, and doesn't have to think about what he's going to do or where he's going to go, what he's going to do. He just takes care of what's in front of him at the moment, and his life just pans out beautifully.
It's interesting because, like we talked about before, I love to read, right? So on my nightstand, there's, I don't know, 12 books. Because when I go to bed, it's like, what do I feel like reading tonight? So I
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
always have multiple books going at the same
Right,
time.
right, right. Hmm.
But as a weird kind of coincidence or whatever you want to call it, two of the books that I have been reading for a little while before I bumped into you, they talked a lot about Taoism.
Hmm.
And one of them was where this young fellow was diagnosed with at 22 years old with a very, very rare terminal cancer. So he just started. They were very religious as a family to start, but he started researching Taoism and Buddhism and Hindu and Islam and Catholicism. He just went deep into different religions to kind of find out what's going on in the world. I accept what's happening to me, right, like a Taoist would.
Hmm.
So it was interesting. So then when you and I came along, when you dropped out of the sky, and I started reading, I'm like, well, that just fits, doesn't it? I mean, this young fella, right? I'm like, I was already kind of down a little road
Hmm.
reading some of the
Hmm.
paragraphs. I guess there's what, 81?
81. Hmm. Yes.
81, yeah. So, and so it was just, I'm like, this is just a trip. This is so perfect for me. And so when I saw that your book, what is it? I Am the
I'm the
Way.
way.
I'm
Hmm.
the way. About the similarities, what, between Taoism and Christianity? Is that
Hmm.
the basis? And again, I'm
Yes,
sorry I
yes,
didn't get a chance
yes,
to
yes.
read it because it sounds fascinating. So what made you? Ooh, I know it might have been your wife, but
Uh-huh.
what made you? Because she's, she wants you guys to be together in heaven, and I love that line. I'm just gonna say it because I love it. Where she goes, "Honey, I want you to go to church and become Catholic so that you'll be able to go to heaven with me." And you're like, "Well, I want you to be a Taoist so you'll be able to spend eternity with me." And then you wink at her, and she's like, "Shit, he did it again." I loved that story, by the way.
Mhm.
I just loved it. But
Uh-huh.
so what is the deal? Uh, Would Jesus Christ be a Taoist?
Okay, so I'm going to step out a little bit and share with you something I generally don't share. Um, and it might be a little controversial, but I will. I
I
remember I
love
said,
controversial.
my dad was a non-theist, right? So he dies, and I'm taking care of his stuff. I'm going through all his stuff, and underneath his bed, you know, like my dad's bedroom was like sacrosanct. I mean, you didn't go in there, you didn't hang in there, you didn't look in his drawers. I mean, that was my dad's room.
Got it.
And there was a box underneath the bed, and in it there were things from his childhood in Hungary. There were his most treasured things. And along with those things was, I'll reach up right here, was this book. This is
What's the
actually
title of the book? I couldn't read it.
The Unknown Life of Jesus Christ by
Wow.
Novatovich. And this is actually was the first printing in 1896. And it's canvas bound and yellow pages. And this is an original printing. And I got this and I'm saying, what is this doing in my dad's best, most important things? And I read the book, and it turns out this guy named Novatovich had heard that Jesus traveled in India during the lost years, during the time he was 13 to 33. So he decided that he would follow the path. And he got there, and there's no kidding. If you ask an East Indian, who is Saint Isa? They'll say, well, that's the person that you call Jesus Christ. Yeah, he traveled. Everybody in India knows that Saint Isa traveled in India. but
Wow.
but here in America, it's kept from us.
I've
And
never ever heard that Jesus stepped in India.
yeah, and
Ever.
not only did he get to India, but when he got to Calcutta, he was pissing and moaning about the caste system because he didn't feel it was equal. Everybody's the same. Everybody shouldn't have castes. And he started rabble rousing, as he was a rabble rouser. And the Brahmins came along and they chased him out of Calcutta, and he fled up to Tibet. And there in Tibet, he studied for many years, and there are scrolls that Novatovich found that talked about that. And then he left. And then when he was crucified, the information came back along the Silk Road, and that was all memorialized in the scrolls as well. And when Novatovich came back, the Washington Post was very fundamentalist at the time, and they called him a charlatan. And the New York Times defended him, and there was a big brouhaha about it. And then there were two other expeditions that followed him, and confirmed his meetings. And he has drawings in here of the towns in Tibet that he went to and all the people that he's.
What's the name of the book again?
It's called The Unknown Life of Jesus Christ
Wow.
by, I always call him Novatovich, but that's not exactly right. It's
I'll dig it up. But that is the first printing.
this is a
That's the first printing.
this is the original printing, yes.
Holy cow, man! I'm always chasing those down. Wow, that's
See,
amazing. I love that. I'm always
yeah.
looking for those. If I even find a second printing from the 1900s or 1800s, I'm super stoked. But original
Yeah.
printing from the 1800s is amazing.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
what a shock that the New York
What is
Times would be the one to back him, because nowadays the New York Times would not be backing him. That's
Well, I don't
interesting.
know. They were pretty progressive. They always been pretty
Well,
progressive.
they backed Hitler. I mean, right? They supported Hitler, so why wouldn't they support this guy?
I don't know.
That's fascinating. So,
Hmm?
were you shocked that your dad had books on faith when he was not a
Not.
religious guy?
Yeah. I don't know what. Of course, he was gone. I couldn't ask him about it. But I started. It opened my eyes, to Jesus even then. Now that would have been 1996, and I married Connie in 2001. So between 96 and 2001, already I'm fascinated by this Jesus guy. And I'm starting to really look deeply into his teachings. And yeah, I'm just going to say it. There's not a hair's breadth of difference between his teachings and the teaching of any of the great wisdom teachers of the world. He is, I mean, so it's so funny. When I went to marry Connie, I had to pass muster with her. She was Southern Baptist, and so they're very conservative. And so I had to pass muster with her pastor, and all of her family was saying, "But honey, aren't you getting yoked to a heathen?" And and I had to go and talk to the pastor, and he says, "Do you accept Jesus Christ as your Lord and Master?" And I said, "Well, the Lord thing I'm not that sure about. The Master thing I'm good with." But he says, "Well, why don't you accept him as your Lord?" And I said, "Well, it depends upon your definition of Jesus Christ. I mean, are you talking about the sack of skin that lived 2,000 years ago, that physical representation, that human embodiment, or are you talking about the unconditional love and spirit that imbued that person, that sack of skin?" And if you're asking me if I bow down and I accept that unconditional love, which I can see in a leaf, I can see in a tree, I can see in a lake, I can see in another human, if I consider that to be my Lord and Master, I say yes. And he looked at me and he goes, "You're okay. Get out of
And is that when you found the new church?
here." Well, yeah,
That's hysterical.
we did find a church. I read about the Charlotte. A bunch of UCC ministers filed suit against the state of North Carolina because they wouldn't at that time allow gay marriage. Before Oberfeld came down, and so they sued the state of North Carolina. And I say, that's the Jesus, that is the inclusivity, that's the kind of Christianity that I believe Jesus would have approved of. So I went to a UCC church here nearby, right across the street from the university, and I really loved him. And I asked Connie, to come with me, and she goes, "No, no." And I said, "Why not?" And she says, "Well, I had taken her to Unitarian churches and Unity churches and New Thought churches and all these peripheral, you know, other things that were almost Christian but not quite Christian,
Not quite Christian
not,
enough.
not quite enough." And I had taken her there, but she's a big environmentalist, and I said to her, "But, but." They have solar panels. And she goes, "Really?" I said, "They have recycling bins." She goes, "Really?" I said, "They have a green committee." She goes, "All right, I'll go." So we get in there, we're sitting in the pews, and they read the first scripture. And she turns to me and she goes, "Bob, they're teaching from scripture." I go, "Well, it is a Christian church." She goes, "But you like it." And I go, "Well, yeah, I do like it." And so we found a place for us.
Oh, I love that. That is, you guys are cuter than hell, I swear. I love that. I love that.
Mhm.
So then, is that what brought you to writing that book? Is finding your dad's hidden treasure, that book, and also, with your years of already the Taoism,
Mhm.
realizing that, hey, this Jesus guy might be a little different than I think here.
Yeah, I think he was a Buddhist priest, but shh,
I won't tell anybody you said
don't tell
that.
anybody. Um, and yeah, so well, she thought my stuff was like weird and really out there, and I couldn't accept her science. And so I started saying, well, if the teachings are the same, there's got to be a way to express these same thoughts, but in Christian terminology. Like, for example, Lao Tzu says that the leader only goes where he is called to go. And then when his work is done, he steps down so that his work will endure, Lao Tzu says. So you could put that in Christian terms. You could say Jesus went where he was called to go, which is from Mark. And then you could also say, and when his work was done, he ascended, and thus his work became eternal. And Connie would read that and she goes, "Oh, I get it. I get it." So it became like a Rosetta Stone. And fortunately, a publisher heard about it and contacted me, and they said, "We want to publish it." And now it's all over the country. And the wonderful thing that makes my heart feel wonderful about it is that I get letters from folks that say, "The church really hurt me, organized religion, I couldn't take it. The exclusivity, the my way or the highway, the sin and burning in hell, that people in Africa are going to burn in hell. I just couldn't take it. So I left the church, but I also left my relationship with the divine. And now you have given me a way to reestablish that relationship without having to buy the dogma of the church." And that does my heart good.
Well, people, I believe, no matter where you are on the spectrum of anything, I think people honestly do want, I don't want to sound like Anne Frank here, but I do believe that people are good at heart, but I do believe
Yes.
that people are searching. And I
Hmm.
think at different times in your life, you're searching for certain things, right? I mean, we've all hit bottom, we've all lost things, we've all reached out, we've all been on our knees. And I think, reading that book from that 22-year-old kid with the terminal cancer, how he was looking through all these different religions trying to find not an answer. He knew what was his thing, but so in your book, did you was there a conclusion? Were you here's my thoughts on how these work together, the Taoism and the Christianity. Did you find what you're looking for?
Oh, yeah, I mean, I did. The book came out to be more of a devotional. It's something where you'll pick it up before you go to sleep and you'll read a chapter, and that's it. just like so many devotionals. The thing about it that's pretty cool that I like is that you might read chapter 24 and then read the Christian version, but in the back in the appendix is the original Tao Te Ching, the original 81 chapters. So you can go back there and see how that was expressed in its original form and see how it is expressed now, or not, either
Yeah,
way.
yeah.
And then
Well,
I also,
we have a number of those. My wife's, been in AA for a long time. She wouldn't mind me sharing this, and she's been sober 21 years, and she's been a sponsor and helped a lot of people. So we
Mhm.
have a lot of those, types of things laying
Right.
around where you go to, today's March 3rd, and what does March 3rd say? Is it like that where you go, it's just a daily thing?
You can be, or you can sit down and read two or three. What I find about it, just like with the Tao Te Ching, the 81 chapters that you were talking about before, they're only one-page chapters. What I find is that the they're written and they are packed with so much
Mhm.
that if you read two or three, you miss a lot. One of them is enough to read and ponder, and give you your daily dose of, thinking. Would you like me to read a chapter?
Absolutely. Yeah,
Oh,
I think I read 33, chapter 33, and I thought, ooh, I like this. I earmarked that and I liked I think it was either 31 or 33 that
oh,
I was particularly drawn
oh,
to.
that um, I just opened randomly to 47. Uh, this is one of the big things that I talk with a lot of my Christian friends about is um, the two great commandments that Jesus gave. One is love your God with all your heart, your soul, and your mind. And I always say to them, you know, it's not just that, it's not just about wanting to love God with all your heart, soul, and mind. It's about getting a mind that is clear and and open enough to be able to love with all your mind. If your mind is cluttered with judgments and the committee in your head's going off and you're all filled up with bitterness and hatred, it's really hard to love anything, much less God, with all of your mind. So I think that that commandment was a commandment to keep fit with all your heart, soul, keep spiritual and keep your mind and work on cleaning that stuff up. And then the other one, love your neighbor as yourself. And I ask, what happens if you don't love yourself? What happens if you don't love yourself? What if you're very critical? Does that mean that the commandment is to treat your neighbor with criticism?
Mhm.
So the commandment really is to learn to love yourself as God loves you so that you can then love your neighbor wholeheartedly. And the first piece of that is learning to love yourself. But here in the West, just like the Marlboro Man, it's all about that would be selfish and that would be this. And then there's the poor souls who feel they don't deserve it to love themselves. But anyway,
I think we're in a very challenging time right now where there's a lot of anger, pain, hurt, bitterness, confusion in our world. And I think there's probably more people that don't like themselves or don't love themselves maybe than any time in history.
mhm.
It's a really bizarre time right now in our world,
Yeah, yeah.
which is really sad. But yeah, fire off one of those, one of your
Okay. All right. So the way the book is organized, there's chapter 47, and I give it a title and I find a quote that I think fits the chapter. So this chapter 47, I've titled it, We Must Learn to Love Ourselves.
Hmm.
And the quote is from Jessica Ortner. It says, You can't hate yourself happy. You can't criticize yourself thin. You can't shame yourself worthy. Real change begins with self-love and self-care. And my writing is here. We are given two great commandments. How do we accomplish this? We are asked why we are preoccupied with a speck of sawdust in our brother's eye, even as we pay no attention to the plank in our own eye. If we are to love our neighbor as ourselves, we must first learn how to love ourselves. Are we not each one of us also a child of Abba, Father God? All we need to know already resides within. Without stepping outside the door, we can comprehend the world. Without glancing through the window, we can see the landscape of heaven. The more we seek wisdom in the heart of others, the less we know. Missionaries listen well. Sit at the feet of the Holy Spirit within and be taught before seeking to make disciples of all nations. And do you want me to read what the Tao, that the
Yes,
same chapter in the Tao, just as
I
a,
would love that, please.
okay. So in the Tao, that same chapter 48, no, 47. 47. It's a little tighter. Without opening your door, you can know the whole world. Without looking out your window, you can understand the way of the Tao. The more knowledge you seek, the less you will understand. The master understands without leaving, sees clearly without looking, and accomplishes much without doing anything.
Hmm. So you the part you just read came
Mm-hmm.
from thousands of years ago in the Taoist
Right,
chapters.
right,
And the middle part was what came from you, which came from
right,
your teaching and your soul.
right, right.
It's amazing how you did that. That really is. I mean, that says it's so thoughtful, and I could see how that would be an amazing, daily or nightly, devotional.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the process of helping you think, and I love it says the more you seek wisdom, the less you're going to have. And I think that almost comes back to the meditation. The harder you try to meditate, the less likely you're going to be able to do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right, exactly.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
What about your other book, Children of Abraham? I didn't really get to glance at that as much as the I Am the Way. What is Children of Abraham about?
well, clearly not growing up in a religious family and all the science fiction and the kind of other experience I have, they make me very curious about, the whole God thing. And so comes along with 9/11 and the years afterwards, and all these folks are running around killing in the name of God. The Shiites and the Sunnis, and God's on our side, and this is, and that may God protect our troops, and all this stuff that goes on. And so again, I don't know if the universal intelligence is even self-conscious. I mean, that's way above my pay grade. But assuming for a moment that God is thinks like we think, and thinks in English. Assuming
And
for
why wouldn't he? There's only
right, right,
10,000 languages.
right,
Seems
right,
like he would think in English.
right. But
Because we're not egotistical or anything. We're
anything, no, we're not making God in our own image or anything. And so, he might be looking down at us and say, "Yeah, not really what I intended for you." And so I posited the idea. Well, what if God could come down and tell us what his intention for us was, face to face? But I couldn't bring God down because then I have to figure out what he looks like and everything. So, so in the book, these messages begin appearing on the ticker on the bottom of your television. Things like "You're all my children, God," or "Your actions have consequences in this life and the next, God," or "You can make your world a heaven or a hell, God." And everybody sees them. They think it's a big hoax to begin with. And I've got characters that are Catholic and Protestant and Sunni and Shia and Jewish and Hindu, and they are all circulating in the basic same area of New York City, and their lives are interplaying. And the question really is, each of them has one of the seven deadly sins as a flaw. Either it's slovenliness or sloth or envy or one of these things. So the question is, who redeems and who doesn't redeem, and how would this play out in the world? It was kind of like a thought exercise when it started, but then I started playing with it, and eventually it turned into a novel.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So here's people thinking this is mind control, government mind control or something. But are there people who are seeing it and are going, "Oh my God, these are actually the words from God coming through," when someone else is reading it going, "Oh, this is crap. The government's trying to
Yeah,
talk us into
absolutely.
stuff."
Sure, sure.
Yeah.
It's like in the first scene where the first message comes, there was a Jewish New York representative, federal, from the U.S. House of Representative, visiting his Jewish Israeli cousin, where there was a Palestinian servant, and there was his counselor, his therapist. So they were all at this very, very swank Jewish home when the message came in, and they each are responding to it a little differently. The politician immediately starts thinking what his response is gonna be. How am I going to respond to this? The Palestinian kid whose parents were killed by an Israeli Defense Forces bomb in Gaza uh, 12 years ago, he's just thinking about how this is another hoax and another play where they're trying to take more away from the Palestinians. And so each of them from their own cultures responding to it differently, sure.
That's
And
fascinating. That's
I have
fascinating.
I have a mobster in there based on my, experience with my mobster.
Do is it almost a little play on kind of science fiction a little bit
It's
where
it's
like
it
cosmic events are happening to people and they don't know how to respond to it?
it's more like one of those Dan, those movies with Tom Hanks. They have like a religious base, but it's really a mystery.
Yeah.
It's more of a mystery psychological thing than it is a science fictiony thing. The only thing about it is that and then you start hearing that if you speak French and I speak Spanish and we're both looking at the same message on TV, you see it in French and I see it in Spanish, and they can't videotape them on TV. And then there's one scene where there's a small newspaper that they have their own printing press, and they put the newspaper to sleep at night, and when the editor wakes up in the morning, there is a handwritten letter from God on the op-ed page, but it's not on the printing plate.
Wow.
you
That is
know
awesome.
so
That's
things
awesome.
like that start happening, which make it almost undeniable that it has to be, but slowly by slowly, it builds up like that.
I don't want to give the book away, but is there like a main character, like a protagonist? Is there someone who finally everyone go answers to who's doing all this, or do I want to not give the book away?
No, no, that's a really good question, because I self-published that back 12 years ago, but now that my publisher has published the second book, now they're bringing out this book as a second edition with some. We've cut it down from 96,000 words to 65,000 words, and tightened it up a lot, and so it's much better. But to answer your question, um, that's what they say. This does not follow your typical thing where you have the protagonist and the main character and the like. But if you know the movie Crash,
Yeah, 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 yeah,
right?
yeah,
Movie Crash, where there was just all these different, like, different stories that all kind of came together.
yeah.
It's kind of like Crash meets
Independence Day.
Independence Day, something like that. Yeah. Um, So I would say that every chapter starts off with a message from God, and God the messages, are affecting all the characters. So in effect, God is the thread that ties it all together, but the lawyer, the lawyer, I suppose, really takes is the main character, the lawyer character.
It's
His
always the
name,
lawyer.
always the lawyer.
Always the lawyer.
Tomas Medina, a fellow who came up from Chile.
You gotta love Tomas.
Yeah, he
That's awesome. Well, God,
my
those are both fascinating.
my model for Tomas Medina was Antonio Banderas. Okay, I had a picture of Antonio Banderas in front of my desk, and all the other characters, were based on, people that I kind of casting in the casting. I casted them as the roles in the movie, and
You took away my next question. I was
uh-huh.
going to say, so who's going to play the characters in the movie? Because I'm fascinated with authors, right? I mean,
Uh-huh.
obviously, I love to read. And so I've been lucky to interview a number of authors. They just fascinate me because, you know, everyone wants to write a book.
Hmm.
Everybody wants to write a book, right? It's you either want to be the lead singer in a rock and roll band or you want to write a book, right?
Right,
I want to
right.
do both. But it doesn't, not everyone's mind works that way to put together a book. Did you have a ghostwriter and an editor or someone help you with that first book?
Um, my wife's sister was the librarian for the CIA, and she edited.
It just keeps getting better.
She edited all the position papers that went to the president. So she was my editor.
That's awesome.
Um, but no, I didn't have a ghostwriter or anything else. I found this little index card program designed for authors where you had a character line and you had index cards and they went along a timeline. And so you could kind of like figure out what this character is doing and put little notes on the index cards. And then you could take the other index cards on the other characters' lines and move them in a timeline so you knew where your scenes were going to, you can move it all around. So, oh, yeah, that would have to happen before this happens. So all you had to do was slide the card,
That's awesome.
and then once all the cards were assembled, it was just a matter of sitting down and
Because you
writing.
just didn't write it in the order of the book. You wrote it as it came out of your head, and then you
Right,
spliced it together how it made
right. Hmm.
sense.
Hmm. Hmm.
Interesting. Interesting. So
Hmm.
I think I have an idea for your next book.
Okay.
CIA librarian who works close to the president hooks up with mob lawyer. I think there's something here. There's some conspiracy theory here because
Hmm.
I don't know. I don't know. So that's I
Hmm.
love it. Now I have to pick up both books. I just have to now.
Uh-huh.
The so did they did Elon University create a position for you, or was there already a to become a professor of mindfulness coordinator at Elon? Was there already something there? Because I've never heard of this type of thing at a university.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So it's very exciting. So when I retired from the courtroom, or semi-retired from the courtroom, I still do 1 day a week. I represent parents of kids who have been taken away by Child Protective Services or Department of Social Services, and I represent the parents 1 day a week. We go to court for those kinds of cases. And you say, how can I do that? But it's really not like I'm trying to prove they didn't do anything. They've got a year to get their act together to get their kids back. Okay, so my job, as much as it is legally explaining to them the system, my job is also to help them understand what they need to do to get their kids back. So it's all about getting them back in shape, you
That's
know?
that's got to be. I've had a lot of friends who've worked in child protective services, and my cousin was an attorney in Orange County representing the kids. He was a child, like
Guardian ad litem.
uh, yeah, yeah, so basically he went to court to defend the kids in these things, and boy, he didn't last too long because
Yeah, yeah.
it's a tough gig, boy. I'll tell you, it's a heartbreaking thing. So bless you for doing that. That's
Hmm.
and another friend of mine who happens to be an author who I met interviewing because of his books. He was a veterans court judge, which I didn't
Oh,
even know they had a
yeah, yeah,
veterans
yeah,
court
yeah.
judge. And
Hmm.
it's kind of like the same thing as like, look, buddy, I don't want you to go into the system. I don't want you to be judged out there. We're going to judge you in our veterans court because we're going to give you the chance to work through your PTSD, your drug addiction, all the things that you're going through, which other courts won't understand.
Right.
Right. And it's a beautiful thing. So that's awesome you're doing that.
Oh,
Thank you
thanks.
for doing
Thanks.
that.
Yeah, there's the kind of parent that their drugs or their anger issues or their whatever challenges are way more important to them than their kids, and they're not going to do anything. And so those cases are easy because there's nothing you can do for them. Then you got the parents who are going to do whatever. If CPS says jump, they say how high. They're going to do whatever they got to do to get their kids back. Those cases are easy. The ones that are hard are the ones that the kids love their mom and the mom loves the kids, but they are so emotionally or intellectually challenged that they just don't have the capacity to create a safe environment where the kids could live and not be neglected. And they get a year and they make some progress. They get 3 steps forward, 2 steps back, 2 steps forward, 3 steps back. And eventually there's no choice but to try to terminate their parental rights. And that's those are the heartbreakers. Those
And
are
then
the
the kids, what, go into the foster care system?
Well, generally, they when they go in those kinds of cases, we generally have already the kids are in pretty good, have been cared for because they've been loved, and so they're adoptable. And the foster parents often are the adoptive, prospective adoptive parents. So it works out. Many times they work out, but sometimes not.
Yeah, that's a tough boy, that's a whole nother rabbit hole we can go, dude. And
Yeah,
that's a
yeah, whole
tough one.
nother rabbit hole.
So back to Elon University
Yeah, yeah,
because
yeah,
now
yeah.
I've got goosebumps. I'm gonna get emotional with the kids because I can't. So it did again, did they already have
Uh-uh.
that? I didn't
No.
think so. Yeah. So how did you get locked into this and come up with this thing?
So when I retired, I had been teaching meditation classes in libraries and in churches and stuff like that. And one of the people I taught worked in the business school. It was a business school teacher at Elon, and they had a position for an adjunct to come in and teach business law. So she said, "This guy teaches pretty good. Why don't you get him?" So I got a job teaching business law first. But there is a spiritual center on campus, and I kind of gravitated over there, started hanging out with those guys. And I wanted to get a course, but it was just like it's a hard conversation. Meditation is just a hard conversation to get buy-in. And so I would suggest this, suggest that. Eventually, though, we have a wonderful system of what we call ERGs or employee resource groups. Like there's the retirement employee resource group, there's the mentorship, all different interests that faculty and staff might have, and they meet, as a group to support, some of their special interests. So we were able to create a mindfulness employee resource group. Those staff and faculty would come once. I'd put on a dog and pony show once a month for an hour, and they get free lunch. And so I started to coordinate various other things in Elon. Never would have happened, but then this movement is occurring on college campuses called HEU. HEU stands for Health Education Universities. And it's the idea of wellness, financial wellness, physical wellness, mental wellness, and the like holistically taking care of the students. So it's kind of a movement that's beginning on college campuses. And Elon happens to be right at the forefront. So I'd been pushing meditation for a while. And when I heard that HEU was starting up, they put out a call for proposals. So I threw in a proposal and they accepted it. And I just finished the first year of teaching meditation for credit, 2 credit course, for credit on campus. And now we just had a conversation. Now we're going to do a 2.0 course where we get into cultivating. Right now, it's basic skills like meditation, breath awareness, body scan, belly breathing, things like that. But now we're going to get into cultivating compassion, loving kindness, equanimity, and in a 2.0, and that's going to be great. And we're going to extend it out from a half a semester course to a full semester course. And now there are 4 other universities. Now they said, no, no, we won't do this online. But now they like it so much, they say, we'll do it online and let's pull in these other 4 universities that are starting their HEU programs. So my timing, just timing, it just, I studied under Master Ni for 8 years. And as I was just beginning to get a hold of it, my mob client's son gets arrested and he demands that I suborn perjury and create evidence, and I refuse to do it. So we all figured the best thing I could do is move to North Carolina.
Because there is definitely going to be a hit out for you, and now maybe even out for me. I don't
Yeah.
even know.
No, no. I went to Johnny and I said, I'm going to move to North Carolina. And he said, sometimes a man has to move on and we can part friends. And we shook hands and it was all good.
Ah,
Um,
thank
but
God
when
for
I
Johnny.
when I got to North Carolina, it was like a blank canvas. I got to start my life all over from a completely different perspective. How often do you get a gift like that? So that happened. The HEU came along just at the right time. I mean, I have been blessed.
That is awesome. I think we need to take HEU and start it in third grade.
Yes.
Um, Seriously, I mean because we're not teaching children anything of usefulness anymore in schools, it seems to me. I haven't had a child in school for a long time, but that just seems like something to me that would be a great course starting earlier than college,
Mm-hmm.
as far
Yeah.
as, helping kids.
Mm-hmm.
We need more healthfulness and mindfulness
Oh yeah.
in our children. But I would imagine you have got to be an outstanding attorney and an amazing dog and pony show guy to go to a school and say, all right, look, I'm going to start a program that's going to be accredited where kids close their eyes for a half hour, 45 minutes every day and sit there and don't do anything. Are you guys in or not?
It's true.
Because I'm thinking, wait a minute, kids are falling asleep in class already. We don't need another
Yeah,
course where
yeah,
kids are
yeah.
going to
You're
sleep
right.
in class.
But what you say, I honestly believe that if we were to integrate mindful teaching and teach kids how to, there's a word that the scientists have, it's called metacognition, thinking about your thinking. And we all do it, but we don't do it intentionally and we don't do it consistently and we don't do it in a structured way that can give you the best results. If you taught little kids in starting in first grade, second grade, some of these skills, you would change the world in one generation. You would change the world. I sometimes I get little groups from the foster world or from the juvenile justice world, the at-risk kids, and one of the kids said to me once that they were out on the playground and let's say Johnny pushed me down and I was really mad and I was gonna hit him back, but I went over to the bench and I sat down and I did my breathing. And I thought that if I went back and I punched him, that we would never be friends again.
Wow.
Now,
Wow.
from a 10-year-old, that's pretty good thinking.
That's amazing thinking because there are a lot of people in this world that don't think that at 40, 50, 60, 70, and 80.
Yeah.
What would be what would be the system or what would be the process, or I'm not sure the word I'm looking for. How would you be able to incorporate that in what you do with family services? Would there be an ability to say, listen, these parents or especially the children, should be required to sit and take this sort of counseling because you know better than me. There's some anger issues and abandonment issues. These children
Mm,
are going through a lot of emotions, and I think something like that, so
would be
that
great.
10-year-old would have the realization you could share with these other children.
You wouldn't believe that this person who we always think is of as a flake has done some amazing stuff. Goldie Hawn, right? She always plays a flake in the movies. Well, turns out that she is one of the best, biggest meditation advocates out there. And she has spent a boatload of her money to bring together the best scientists and educators. And she has come up with a K through 12 method of integrating mindful practices into the classroom without having to create new courses, just to integrate it into the existing classrooms. And it's amazing stuff. And it's called Mind Up, Mindup. And it's K through 12, and she has techniques and little things to do in each course. But like I say, it is a hard conversation to have, especially in today's education system. You know, the old expression, when you're up to your ass in alligators, it's hard to remember that you wanted to drain the swamp.
Yep.
Our
Yeah. I
educators
had not,
aren't there.
I've never heard of that. And Goldie Hawn's pretty prominent, and Kurt Russell, her partner is pretty prominent. You would think that we would have heard of that. That's unbelievable that I've never heard of that, that she's
Yeah,
doing that. Is it
it's
is it
just
actively or is she
Yeah, there
trying to
are
do
some
this?
there are some systems that have adopted it, and there's other systems that have adopted just meditation practices, and the results, the statistics that come out of these programs are mind-blowing. They're so effective. They reduce absenteeism, they reduce fights, and they increase attention. Grades go up. I mean, everything that you would possibly want from something that doesn't require any physical equipment. It's not a major expenditure, and it doesn't take up a lot of time.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, now that we're going to get rid of the Department of Education,
Oh, right.
right?
Oh, God.
Now maybe we could do something. Maybe these schools can start adopting things. I don't know. I mean, obviously I remember one of my favorite parts of school when I was a kid growing up was taking a nap and then having cookies and milk. I mean, that was my absolute favorite. And people laugh at me about that, but you know what? A lot of cultures who take siestas and take naps and find time for quiet time and downtime that just aren't running like our society are healthier people,
Hmm.
right? And I think bringing this back to our children to just take it down a notch will make healthier kids.
Oh, yeah. Thich Nhat Hanh, the Buddhist monk, um, well, he's passed now, but he established a center in France, and it's called Plum Village. And in Plum Village, the bell sounds randomly throughout the day. And the culture there is that when the bell sounds, you just stop. If you're shoveling dirt, you stop mid-stroke. You just stop, check in with yourself. How am I doing? How am I feeling? Take a breath, follow the sound of the bell into the silence, and then just go about your business again.
Wow.
You know,
Wow. Just that moment of
just that
mindfulness to
moment.
kind of, yeah, to settle the brain.
Mhm.
Well, Bob Martin, you are fascinating. I mean, we haven't even scratched the surface of Mr. Bob Martin here, that's for sure. I just so grateful for your time and so many wonderful stories and what you're doing. And again, I mean, there's so many things that I wrote down while we were talking that just, I want to get to you, but just for the sake of time, I do have one last question.
Sure.
And I ask every one of my guests, it's the same question, and I don't preface it, I don't tell them ahead of time, I don't give them a heads up. And it doesn't, you have so many facets, so it could be anything with you. Most people have a specific thing we talk about, but I just always ask if you wanted to leave something to our listeners, people would hear this, or people that you talk to, if there's a thought that you have, or if there's something that means something to you, something that you would just like to sign off and share a thought, what would that thought be?
Get a dog.
Did a dog?
No, I'm I'm
I
kidding.
miss my dog. That hurts.
I,
I
there's
miss my
nothing like a
Jeter.
dog. There's nothing like a dog. But seriously, it's I would go back to the same thing, and I would say it over and over again. You're not your thoughts, and really get it that you're not your thoughts, that you are the creator of your thoughts. I know that you often say, "I had a thought." Just be aware of the fact that there is an I in that sentence. And who is the I that had the thought? And that you do have a say about who that I is. You have a say in the matter of your own life. Um, and if it takes a little effort and it takes a little learning and it takes a little practice, it's worth it.
Is is meditation having a thought or having no thoughts at all?
No, it's having a thought.
It's
You
having a
don't,
thought.
you cannot, you can meditate your whole life and never have an empty, you will never have an empty mind. If you're lucky, it might all fade into background noise, but it never goes away. We're not constructed that way. It is befriending your thoughts. It is acknowledging your thoughts. It is recognizing your thoughts. It is allowing your thoughts, not fighting against them. What you resist persists, but what you can be with will let you be. Everything about the mind is counterintuitive. If you can't sleep at night because you're having racing thoughts and you're trying to stop having the racing thoughts, your mind will only race more quickly. If you pay attention to your racing thoughts, if you allow them, if you're curious about them, well, why did I have that thought? Or that's an interesting thought. Or what is that thought trying to tell me? Let me pay attention to it, which is so counterintuitive. But if you do that, you'll find it's almost as if your thoughts now become bored with you. They just say, oh, this is no fun. This is no fun. I can't bother this guy anymore. And they let you be.
Is there such a thing, just for lack of a better term, is there such a thing as purposeful meditation where you go in with a thought that you want to meditate on, or is that defeat the purpose?
There are different forms of meditation, like transcendental meditation, where you have a mantra and things like that. But no, the intention is that you create an intention to pay attention to something, all the while understanding that you're going to fail. Okay? The setting of the intention is like putting a an alarm clock in your brain to remind you when you're not paying attention. So you have to have the intention to pay attention. Otherwise you just go into default mode and do what you do all the time. Just your mind goes blah 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 blah. But if you have the intention to pay attention to your breathing, say, your mind will go blah 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 blah, but then at some point it goes, oh, I'm not paying attention to my breathing. So that's where the intention comes in. But you don't get hung up on having to succeed in accomplishing the intention. It's just like I'm setting a clock, I'm setting an intention so that I am reminded when my mind goes off that that's what I intended to do, so that I can come back and begin again and
Mm,
begin again and again and again.
wow. All right, I'm gonna give it another try.
All right.
I'm going to give meditation.
Go to my website and get my little primer. It's free. It's called Is Meditation for Me? What it is, what it's not, how to start, and where to find resources. It's
Now, is that the free book you were talking about?
That's a free book. Yes,
Okay. So
it's a
what is it
downloadable
again?
book.
So we're going to post your website and all the ways to reach Bob Martin. But so on your site, there's somewhere we can click, and I've seen it.
As soon as you click it, there's a button at the top, download your free ebook here.
Awesome.
You
Awesome.
just click on it and you download your free ebook, and then you have it. Yeah, so you download it and it's a flip book, and then at the bottom it says download the PDF. You download the PDF and then it's yours.
Awesome. You know, Bob, this was great. I can't thank you enough. This really was so wonderful, the time that we had. And so we're going to put all your stuff on there, but what's your website and where can people reach you?
It is a wiseandhappylife.com.
awiseandhappylife.com. And with that, we end with beauty, awe, and fulfillment.
Yes, sir.
Love it. Love it. All right, my friend, you were spectacular. You're so much fun. I appreciate your time. I can't wait for people to see this, and I will see you on the other side.
Okay.
Thanks, Bob.
Thank you.
Thanks again for joining us on another episode of What If You Could podcast. Please subscribe, like, share, and give us any feedback. We'd love to hear it. And remember, if you can dream it, you can do it. See you next time.